story coming up on
All right, we are live on.
The latest on the ongoing political unrest. That's Wednesday, but for now, I'm Kevin Matthews in Washington, alongside producer Simon Marks and Rebecca Foster on the bulletin desk. Everyone with feature story news everywhere. Have a great evening. Goodbye.
The Labor Forum is brought to you each week by your Teamster friends and neighbors. The Teamsters have over a century of experience in enriching and protecting the rights of workers nationwide, and they continue to build on that proud legacy every day. With 1.4 million members, 30% of whom are women, Teamsters can be found in almost every major industry. They're the hard-working men and women whose jobs have always helped keep America strong, while providing the goods and services that keep the country running smoothly. For more information, www.teamster.org.
We plant the food, we drive the cab, we load the ship, we run the land, we build some bridges, we light the flame, we do the work. This is our day, we do the work. We do the work. We do the work. This is our day.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Labor Forum. You are tuned in to WRFG 89.3 FM in what is again another remarkably sunny day and beautiful day in Atlanta. We just can't figure out whether to wear a heavy coat and boots or wear shorts, but here it is. Today is Wednesday, March 6th. No, March 5th. March 5th, 2014. My name is Diane Mathowitz. I'm a retired auto worker and the host of this program, and I want to welcome all of you who are listening on your car radios, particularly if you've just finished your hard day at work and are heading home. And then there's some of you that are going the other way, coming from home and heading into work. And we want to welcome all of you to this program that talks about issues that are of great importance to workers, their families, communities. And we always appreciate the guests who come on our show. The music that starts off the program is by John Fromer, and it's a song called We Do the Work. It comes from a CD of the same title. The opinions that are expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the Board of Directors, staff, or volunteers, but of course, this program is one of the premier programs that fulfills the mission of WRFG, which is to give voice to those that are left out by the corporate media, lied about by the corporate media, and essentially just abandoned by the corporate media. So that's the goal of WRFG, and specifically the Labor Forum. I want to mention that next week is the start of our spring pledge drive here at the station for 3 weeks. Those of us on air will be asking you, our listeners, to make a financial contribution to keep us on air. As you know, again, this is a community station. It is a listener-supported station, and it means that the vast majority of the money that pays our electric bills, pays for the tower rent, pays our 2 staff, comes from you because you appreciate the very special kind of programming, the music, and the information and analysis that you get here. So I hope that starting this Sunday night with Map Time with Wanique Shabazz, that you will open up your hearts and your pocketbooks and contribute to WRFG. So sitting next to me in the studio is Helen Butler. And Helen is the Executive Director of the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. And I have invited her to be on the program today because we want to talk about the issue of voting rights. The Georgia legislature is in session. And it is so dismaying to read accounts of what kind of bills these people who have been elected, and you sometimes wonder by whom, are passing. And of course, we have seen similar kind of attacks on working people, poor people coming out of the national Senate and Congress as well. So I've asked Helen to come on and we're going to talk about voting rights. So hi, Helen. Thanks for being here.
Well, Diane, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here on such a beautiful day and to really support what you're doing for labor, for the community. We really appreciate all you do.
Oh, thanks. I should say again, for those of you who are listening, whether it's on your computer, your radio, or on a mobile device, that we also are live streamed on video. And the Labor Forum has its own YouTube channel. And that gives you an opportunity. Sometimes people say, I can go into a store and somebody will say, I recognize your voice. Are you on radio? Now, if you go on the YouTube channel, you can also see what I look like, and you can see what all the guests look like as well. And you can see what a good time we have here in the studio. Okay, so Helen, I want to start off by asking this question. You know, when this country was founded, and the Constitution was written, and you have lots of politicians always talking about the Constitution and the great democracy that they claim to represent. But we know that when this country was founded, that the only people who really counted, the people who had the vote, was this very, very small percentage of white male landowners, kind of like the 1%.
Yes, that does sound kind of familiar, doesn't it?
Kind of like the 1%.
That's exactly what it was.
And so, so in some respects, we might say things haven't changed a whole lot, but in one respect, for now a couple centuries, intense struggle by ordinary people, by all those that were left out by that Constitution, to gain the right to vote. So I don't want us to go all the way back several hundred years, but I do want us to talk. In 1965, this very historic Voting Rights Act was passed. And if you wouldn't mind just talking a few minutes about the people who really were the heroes and sheroes who accomplished that. Who was it?
Well, Diane, as you know, it was the everyday people, the field laborers, the factory workers, the housewives, the if you wanted, the maids, the janitors, the people that did the labor that really built this country. It was the poor people, women as a whole, and people of color. People like me were considered 3/5 of a human being in the Constitution that we talk about, but it was the everyday people, young people, old people, disabled people. It was workers, the people that, the secretaries, you know, everyone that you can think of, no matter what discipline they were in, the educators, it was the school teachers, it was people that were working poor, the people who were out there, the farmers, you know, those kinds of people who made the difference. Religious people. There were a lot of pastors that got engaged in the process to make sure we had the right to vote. But it was all of us collectively coming together to make sure that we had that right, because truly the vote is power. You get to control a lot of things with that vote. Why do you think people are taking it away or want to withhold it from certain groups? It's because it determines everything about your life. If you're born, your birth certificate. If you work, what kind of wages do you get? If it's when you die, where does the cemetery is? You know, so everything in between that happens to you is determined by a vote, because that vote equates to public policy, and that means power.
Okay, so it has been, it was a considerable achievement in 1965. And so that's 49 going on 50 years ago.
49 years ago.
And as people have noted across the South, there are all kinds of both women, people of color that have attained political office. And so what we have seen now in the last couple of decades, first there was an expansion of the vote. Could we talk about the different kinds of ways? You know, most people know that you go vote on a Tuesday, a work day, whoever thought that up. And and so there have been expansion of the times to vote. But now the Georgia legislature is one that is restricting that, pushing it back. Could you talk for a second about what it is that's going on in the Georgia legislature that has either passed, might pass, that the governor could sign? What are the bills or that might restrict voters' rights in Georgia?
Well, as you know, it's been a lot of voter suppression techniques, whether it's reducing the precincts, whether it's consolidating counties, making cities out of certain demographics. But most recently in the legislature is HB 891, which, in 2009, we got this great progressive movement to have early voting, which would give us 45 days to actually go in person to vote early so that we wouldn't have to cram it into one day. It wouldn't be the long lines. It wouldn't be them not being prepared and having so frantic of the election administration that votes didn't get counted. But you'd have time to plan and to actually administer the election process. So they gave us 45 days. Well, then, it was before 2009. In actuality, it was before 2008 election cycle. So we had 45 days. Well, we stood around the buildings because we were so excited to vote and have that opportunity. They decided to reduce it from 45 days to 21 days. Well, now comes this election cycle, HB 891, and they want to reduce it from 21 days down to 6 days. And it's only because there are certain people that use that early voting process versus the absentee voting process. The absentee voting process, of course, you don't have to have a reason, but it's still 45 days, meaning that you mail it in. You don't physically go in to vote, but you mail it in. So there's a certain demographics that uses that process. And then there's us that use the coming in person, because we learned a long time ago that you could stuff those absentee ballots. There were a lot of dead people that were voting absentee because you didn't have to show ID, you don't have to do anything. But now, because we were using that early voting process in person, they want to reduce it down to 5 days. And the rationale is that they wanted to save some money for the little cities, the small cities. But what this bill does is Atlanta, DeKalb, Savannah, all those great metropolitan areas would still be covered by this bill as well. So you'd have everybody coming to vote in Atlanta on one day. And we know we already have problems with them with lines. They couldn't handle it. And all of the election people really want this because it makes their jobs easier.
Well, the thing that I understand about this bill is that, as you said, the rationale supposedly is to save money. But we're talking about people going to courthouses that are already open, that already have staff, and you go in and you vote. So there's not any extra people and there's not any extra anything.
Well, you might need one additional person because it says that you have to have 3 people to man on any election day. So yes, each city, small cities only have 1 precinct open. But in Atlanta, you may have several other precincts open. But in those small cities, they only have 1 person. But you're right about it's not an additional cost because you have to have 3 people to process absentee voting. So if you got the 45 days for the absentee voting, what difference is it going to make? But the idea is selling it as saving costs. But guess what, Diane? Right after the Shelby decision, they said, let's reduce the number of precincts because that will save money as well because a lot of people are voting early. It's so popular. Let's just do it with, reducing the number of precincts. So there have been counties that had 25 precincts that have gone down to 1 precinct because they said early voting was so great. Well, now you're saying reduce early voting days because that's going to save you money. It doesn't work that way. So I think rationale people will understand what is happening.
Well, the idea, of course, that saving money is somehow a good reason to make it impossible for people who don't have transportation and have to figure out how to get there, for people who work long hours and try to figure out another day to get there. So it's as though democracy and voting is a cost-effective measure as opposed to a right.
But listen, at voting, but we're so liberal with our gun laws, but we won't be liberal with our voting laws. So it just doesn't play. I mean, I can't understand that.
Let me go to, is there any other thing in reflecting on voting rights or suppression that's currently before the Georgia legislature?
No, that's basically HB 891 is
the one that reduces the one.
Yes.
All right, when we come back, listeners, we're going to talk to Helen about pushback by the people, to maintain their voting rights and why it's so important. But first, we're going to have this brief message from WRG. Okay, so when they come back, we'll...
So we talk about the Shelby decision for just a minute to lead into the...
Okay.
So what we do next?
So I ask you, okay, so Georgia's one of the many states where there is suppression attempts statewide. So what's the national after the Supreme Court decision?
Okay.
And then we'll go into what's happening on the ART. So, listeners, we are talking with Helen Butler, and she's here. She is the executive director of the Georgia Coalition for a People's Agenda, and one of the things that coalition really works on is the issue of voting rights. Helen, before we took the break, we were talking about particular voter suppression measures that are taking place here in the state of Georgia, and there might be many people who think, well, the South, of course, that will be always a big issue by those that are in power to keep the vote down, particularly of people of color. But it was the Supreme Court that sort of really did this big assault on voting rights, and I was wondering if you wanted to address just a little bit the national both attack or pushback or rollback of voting rights, and then a little bit about how it's being responded to.
Okay. Well, Shirley, last year around May, you had what we call the Shelby decision in Alabama, where the Supreme Court ruled that the formula, Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, was null and void, or was antiquated, and so that it called upon Congress to come up with a new formula to opt people into the coverage. So it basically nullified the Voting Rights Act. After all of those people, those working people, some lost their homes, some lost their jobs, some died, that even trying to get the Voting Rights Act, all of that effort was just nullified with the vote of 5 justices on the Supreme Court. So that tells you how important the Supreme Court is in terms of the public policy and making things right. So as a result of that, we now have to come up with a way to make sure that any voting change that we track it, that we understand, and we have to find great lawyers like the ACLU, the Legal Defense Fund, the Lawyers Committee, whomever, to help us to fight legal challenges, because we don't have that administrative challenge where DOJ, Department of Justice, would pre-clear voting changes. So all of those states that discriminated, were shown to have discriminated in the past, used to get it pre-cleared. Well, that Shelby decision just wiped that out.
Okay, so this coming Monday, March 10th, there's really a kind of very important event that's taking place, and it's actually originating in Selma. For anyone who needs a little history lesson, of course, Selma is the city that became sort of synonymous with the struggle for voting rights, the attack that took place on marchers back in '65, and the march that went to Montgomery. So if you wouldn't mind again letting our audience know just what is it's going to happen on March 10th and what the significance of the whole caravan to Washington is.
Well, what we're doing is trying to get people aware again that voting rights are being attacked, and that we have to get back in place some process to make sure that we protect our voting rights. So there's ways that we can do that. We're going to start with the reenactment, as they always do in Selma, on March the 8th through the 9th. And then leaving Selma, we're gonna caravan 50 cars, 50 cities, and the ultimate goal is in 2015, when the actual 50th anniversary is, we want to have registered 100,000 voters at least. That's a minimum. But we're going to caravan to the Supreme Court in D.C. and stand out and rally and let our Congress people and the Supreme Court know that we were not satisfied with that decision, and that we're going to try to, if people want to talk to their Congress people, to tell them why voting right matters, why we have to have in place another law that will protect our voting rights. But on Monday the 10th, that caravan is going to stop in Atlanta. And of course, we know Dr. Lowry, along with Reverend Hosea Williams, Dr. King, Dr. C.T. Vivian, all those people, they fought for the Voting Rights Act. And so Dr. Lowry and Reverend McDonald and so many other people that are still here are going to be talking about why it's important for us to emphasize that a new bill that will put that formula back in place has to be enacted. And so we'll be gathering, and we're urging people to let their people, Congress people, know that they want a bill back in place to protect our voting rights. So at the Capitol step at 4 p.m. on Monday the 10th, we will be holding a press conference, and the people from Alabama will be joining us at that press conference, and we'll be talking about why it matters and why it's important that we get that Voting Rights Act back in place. Because if we don't have an administrative process, that means we got to have a legal process, and believe me, that is expensive. So come out. We're asking people, if you like to express your opinion, you should be with us at the Capitol so that you can talk to your representatives here in Georgia as well as Congress.
So again, folks, that's this coming Monday, the 10th of March, 4 o'clock on the Capitol steps. And then there's an event that's going to take place across the street in Central Presbyterian. You want to talk a little bit about that?
In Central Presbyterian, for those who don't know, there is a bill that has been introduced. It's a bipartisan bill, and while it's a step in the right direction, we want to educate people about what that bill covers, what it doesn't cover, which states would be covered, which states are not covered, and what you can do to help us to make sure we get the right policy in place. This is the time for input, for opinions, whatever you care about. If you care about your exercising your right to vote, this is the time to come be with us as we journey from the state capitol rotunda over to Central Presbyterian Church to talk about what's in that new voting rights amendment.
And of course, this program is one where I'm always talking about the power of working people. And I think when we look back on history, we see that it's when the people organize, unite, mobilize, come out in the streets, and that's the way progressive laws and progressive change gets made. And so we saw that, in fact, with the Voting Rights Act, because it was those marches, those people who went to their county courthouses, faced down cops, faced down dogs, faced down, the really repressive apparatus of the state, and persisted and persisted and persisted. And I think that is kind of what we are in desperate need for now, is a recognition that we have the power and that we need to press for what we want.
That's right.
And so, Helen, if you want in the last few minutes to just give some website information or telephone numbers for how people who are listening to this program, who maybe haven't been thinking so much about that their right to vote actually could get taken away. And we haven't even talked about how people who have prison records are denied the right to vote, and that is massive. And there's just so many ways that people are being prevented from exercising that right. So go ahead and give our listeners just that info right in this last couple minutes.
All right, and I do want to say that a lot of labor organizations were part of that movement, and they're going to be a part of this movement on Monday as well. ASME and a lot of the national groups, Charlie at the Labor Council, all of those organizations are coming together and standing for the right to vote. So if you need information, call 404-653-1199 or go to gcpaagenda.org, gcpagenda.org, and get more information about this event. Join our email list, or come and get information about it, and we'll be happy to help you understand what we're talking about.
Again, listeners, I want to thank, on behalf of you and me, Helen Butler coming in today and providing this information. I know lots of times many of us think that the vote really doesn't make any difference, but then when you look at what goes on at the Georgia legislature and what's going on at the national, at the Congress, you recognize that, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who get elected into office who never, ever truly reflect the interests of the people who are their constituents. So please, I'm going to Chokwe Lumumba's memorial service this weekend, and I'll give a report back on that next Tuesday and Wednesday. Tune in again and stay tuned to Democracy Now!